Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Campus Dialogues, a Muslim Views production in affiliation with Muslim Fin. Muslim Fin, your roadmap to Islamic banking and finance. I'm your host Ali Sali, and here to introduce our guest this evening is my good friend and colleague Siraj Buzik. Siraj?
Assalamu alaikum, Ali. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Good to be back.
Ali, like I say, another week, another podcast. And tonight we have a special guest on our podcast tonight. That person is none other than Sheikh Ziyad Isaacs. Sheikh Ziyad, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much.
Sheikh Ziyad, well, just some background in terms of who you are. I mean, you currently serve as a lecturer at IPSA, the Islamic Peace College of South Africa, in Islamic commercial law and Islamic finance. And we also have several publications in Islamic finance, both locally and globally. You're also an Islamic finance entrepreneur and professional. You hold a bachelor's degree in Islamic finance with specialization in capital markets from Selangor International Islamic University in Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, sure. He also holds a Master of Science degree in Islamic finance from the International Center of Education in Islamic Finance in Malaysia. Sheikh Ziyad is a well-trained and groomed, international Sharia Research Academy expert for Islamic finance in Malaysia, as well as a research officer and associate consultant with ISRA Consultancy after completing his initial degree in Islamic finance. So, Ziyad, probably as a starting point, perhaps you can give us some background in terms of your journey to Islamic finance, what you're currently doing now, and what's happening in the Islamic world.
Jazakallah khair. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil mursaleen Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina wa Mawlana Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me and for the opportunity to share my experience. My journey in Islamic finance, I think it started, sometimes you don't know where the journey started. You only realize that when you get to a certain point in the journey and you realize, you look back, okay, that's where it started.
Yeah.
Started a long time ago, 2008. I think that's where I pivoted into Islamic finance in particular. I was studying at that point in time at Al-Azhar College in Egypt.
Okay.
And I came back. My mother just finished off at her work. She had a sum of money to invest. And she asked me to assist her. I assisted her. And then we met a consultant. And I asked him, so how do we pay the zakah? And I asked him, do you pay it from the money that's in the account? Or should we pay it separately from another account? And he said, that's a good question. I'll get back to you.
Okay.
We're 2024 now.
You still waiting, sure.
Yeah. But that was actually the beginning.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it at the time because I was studying at Al-Azhar. I was studying your traditional Islamic studies, classical Arabic, etc. And that actually led me to read up about zakah on investments. So that was the starting point.
Okay.
And from there, I just started reading up, got into it, so that I'm doing Islamic finance. Coincidentally, at the time I was doing my Sharia studies, I was also doing a BCom at UNISA while I was in Cairo.
Okay.
So I was always leaning towards business, accounting, etc. And I took the opportunity to look into Malaysia, but it was very expensive.
Why Malaysia, sure?
Because Malaysia was the only thing you found when you put Islamic finance in Google. You find Malaysia.
Malaysia comes up, yeah.
So nothing else was on the cards in 2008. And then I started reading up about it. I started speaking about it, etc. And the late Maulana Ihsan Hendricks, he visited Egypt. And he asked me, why are you doing UNISA? Why are you and Al-Azhar, and you're also teaching English here? You're doing a whole lot of things. So I told him, I want to be a sheikh. And he was like, I said, no, I don't mean it in that way.
Yeah, yeah.
I said, in what way do you mean it? I said, sheikhs don't earn much. I was brutally honest at the time.
Yeah.
And I don't want a sheikh's salary.
Yeah.
Because when I was learning my hifz, I was the older student, so I was with the sheikhs.
And you could see.
And I could see, no, I don't want to do that. With due respect.
Yeah.
And the reason I really went out to go study was we didn't have an imam or sheikh or someone that can lead the family in any of our janazas or nikahs, etc. Or even to make a dua.
Yeah.
And that was just my reason. It wasn't really to do anything else or earn anything.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I was doing a BCom, because I wanted to have a professional job and something that I can do to earn money. like good money and have
Decent job.
a standard of living that, we all aspire to have when we're young. It changes over time. But at that age, in your early 20s, you want to make money. You're looking at what is the best career or the best degree that I can get the
That is
best
the
job
reality for most people.
to earn the most money.
Whether it's Islamic or not.
Exactly.
Whether you're Muslim or not, that's what people look at
Yeah.
when they go to study. What field pays the most money, whether it's accounting, whether it's engineering, whether it's medicine. That's one of the motivating factors when they actually select a field of study.
Exactly. So yeah, zakat was actually my
That's the focal
entry
starting
into
point.
the Islamic finance space. Yeah.
Sure. Sheikh, so when you finished your studies and you came back to South Africa and you
Yeah.
settled, I take it you probably got married, had family. What happened then?
Fortunately for me, getting married and having a family was before I went to study.
Oh,
So
mashallah.
all of that happened. All the kids were born abroad.
Okay.
So when I came back, I had that weight on my shoulders.
Correct.
Coming back with a family, no income, etc.
Nothing waiting for you in terms
Nothing
of a job.
waiting. It's all of those bells and whistles that a normal sheikh would come back with, and no job opportunities because the market is flooded.
Correct.
So you're just sitting there and like, okay, what do I do? And my last stint in Malaysia was with Islamic Consultancy. It was with the International Sharia Research Academy.
Okay.
So they are a research think tank commissioned by the Central Bank of Malaysia.
Okay.
And I worked with him for my last 3 years while I was doing my master's.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to be the personal assistant to the CEO of the consultancy arm of this
Okay.
research
Mashallah.
think tank.
Yeah.
And that's where I saw and how Sharia consultancy and advisory actually operates. We were servicing clients, public clients, Malaysian government, central bank, other governments that wanted to tap into Islamic finance, and also local international banks, capital markets, and insurance companies. So it gave me like a full spectrum of what the industry is about. And I learned much more in experience in that 3 years than my degree and my postgraduate studies put
Yeah.
together.
Correct.
Because you were sitting there, as we call it, on site,
Yeah. Yeah.
experiencing all of
It's
these things.
like your practical,
It's
basically,
practical.
compared to the theory you've been doing for
And the
years.
table would be economists, lawyers, accountants, Sharia advisors. So a lot of people think Sharia advisory is only about Sharia scholars. It's not.
Correct.
There's a pool of professionals that actually comes together and puts it together. And I was the scribe
Okay.
to compile all of the opinions, all of the suggestions, the recommendations, and then I would compile it, and then they would send me home with homework to compare to all the legislature that is available
Wow.
internationally in the market.
Sure.
So that gave me a very strong base in terms of how the advisory and consultancy space works. And with that, coming back to South Africa, it was kind of, okay, I know this thing. I know how to do it. I've got a very strong network in Malaysia and globally because of that experience. And I started I Consult Africa in partnership with Isra Consultancy, with Prof. Ashraf and the team,
Yeah.
giving me some support and advice of how to go about it.
Alhamdulillah, that's a fantastic story. And what I always find interesting is, whenever we have guests on the show, when we ask them about their experiences and their history and how they got to the specific point, they'll always say, I started off studying. I was, in the Deen. I studied in Al Azhar, and then I wanted to find something where I could earn a bit of money, right? But what's interesting about what you said was in those 3 years, you learned more than you did in your, in all of the time that you were studying. But what's amazing about your journey is that your studies also really helped to catapult you, almost in a sense of when you were doing the practical part, you could quickly identify the opportunities.
Indeed.
Which is quite amazing. What I want to ask you about, though, is from a South African context, because our audience is, Muslim Fin really focuses on the South African audience, both Muslim and non-Muslim. From a South African perspective, where do you see the Sharia market, where is it now, and how has it grown since, let's say, 2008 when you initially started? Yeah.
Okay. The Sharia market, if I talk about Islamic banking, capital markets and insurance, not the consultancy side. So let's talk about the industry first.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it hasn't grown much. It hasn't developed much over the past, decade. And evidence to that is I am now training the people that I used to study about. So for example, and I'm going to say this on here, a lot of the clients, the corporate clients that we do training and workshops for, are the leaders of industry, so to speak, were the leaders of industry more than 10 years ago. So why that is an issue, we don't see any form of kind of succession planning, if we can call it that, for the industry. So there is a stunned growth, because if leadership is not being recycled, so to speak, then we are stagnating in the growth of the industry. And yes, the numbers, you guys know better than me, in Islamic banking, finance, capital markets, hasn't grown incrementally over the past year. So yes, we're adding more products and we're adding more services, but we need to ask ourselves, are we adding more value? And when we talk about more value, is the numbers are going up, but the number of people engaged are decreasing, meaning the small amount of people are just getting richer. So are we then different from the capitalist system? And that's the question we should ask. What is the benchmark to measure the growth and the development for Sharia? Not Sharia advisory, Sharia industry in the South African market. And maybe I'm talking a bit technical, but the reality is, what growth are we talking about? Are we talking about analytical, financial growth? Are we talking about impactful growth in terms of lifestyle? Are we talking about GDP per capita growth in terms of looking at unemployment rates, that type of thing? On the banking side, we're just going to be looking at balance sheet. On the capital market side, we're going to look at the performance of companies. On the insurance side, we're going to be looking at the premiums, etc. But let's move over to the Sharia advisory and consultancy side. When we look at it, why is that market not growing? And the reason for that is because we're only focusing on the analytics, on the numbers. We're not focusing on the qualitative growth and development that is actually the core of Sharia, banking, capital markets, and insurance. And I said to one of the clients, we focus so much on, or we ask the question, why is Islamic products not being taken up in the market, and we're putting money to marketing? And our answer was simple, that if we put that same marketing budget to educate and create awareness to the consumer, that is, and I'm talking about varsity level, fresh graduate level, that's going to be your high net worth individual in the next 5 to 10 years, you won't need to have a marketing budget in 10 years' time. If you spend your marketing budget today in a proper manner, because today's graduates, today's fresh entry to the market, to the industry, is tomorrow's consumer of your products.
Absolutely, and I think that is the reason for us having this podcast. And what we're trying to do, firstly, because we realize and we see, and we agree, I agree 100% with what you're saying, we see that it's an awareness issue, firstly, because like you said, there are more products being developed and more products that are made available to the community, but there isn't an uptake of the products. Firstly, because there isn't an awareness. And then secondly, and I think Siraj is probably going to touch on this, is the education piece. So some of the things that we always say on this podcast is, finance in itself is quite complicated. We use terms like capital markets and these types of different terms that are very intimidating to the college student or the teenager. Trying to get into Islamic finance, and so we understand the importance, I guess, of education and really trying to get the word out there. So that's something that we want to do, because we know that finance being so complicated and then mixing it with, the terms, diminishing musharaka, mudaraba, the mudarib. And people don't know what the portfolio manager is, for example. You know what I mean? Sometimes people don't know what a term deposit is. And now you have to put that in an Arabic term. Do you feel like there are maybe more creative ways to be able to get this message across, in terms of education? Because I know your focus is very strongly in the education field as well.
Yeah, I think I like what you said about and the sequence you said it in, creating the awareness first and then enabling the education. And I think platforms like this is where you create awareness and then we get people's buy-in. And now you want to know more about Islamic finance, and then we start education. Being more creative, I think the opposite, because using all these fancy terms and jargons, etc., is being overly creative. Maybe we must be less creative and more simplified in terms of removing the Arabic jargon, removing the technical terms, etc. Because for all the Arabic words that we use in Islamic finance, there's English translation. So why not use that? Because we speak the English language. And from a Sharia advisory and consultancy perspective, we have a lot of clients in South Africa that are non-Muslim, from the non-Muslim faith. And so how we approach it is we remove all the Arabic terminologies. Because unfortunately, Arabic is associated with Islam, and Islam in the worldview is associated with radicalism, terrorism, etc. So to remove that kind of propaganda that has already established a narrative in the consumer's mind or the client's mind, you remove the Arabic terminology, you remove the Islamicity of your principles, but you speak about the fundamental value that these principles is able to achieve for the client in his life. Because his life is part of his business, is part of his life, not his life part of his business. So we need to propagate the value add of religiosity to the life of the human being. And that will translate into the welfare of the business, the prosperity of the business. But I think our focus is always mostly on how we're going to make the business work and not the man. And so we try to get the man to work, because if the man works, then the society works, and by default, the business will operate. But the opposite is evidently not true.
Sheikh, you mentioned quite a few strong points there in terms of creating awareness and then education. If we look at the current Islamic financial industry in South Africa specifically, what we've seen is a lot of these corporates and non-Muslim companies are now starting to offer Islamic windows. And what they've done, obviously, is that they've brought to market Islamic products. And what we've seen is, and I don't know what your view is on it, what we've seen from a product innovation or product development point of view is that we aren't trying to recreate, or we're not really being innovative. We more or less basically taking what the existing products are out there conventionally and providing a Sharia-compliant alternative. So would it be a home loan? I've got a Sharia-compliant home finance. Would it be vehicle finance? Would it be the Jara Islamic vehicle finance that we have? Is it really an alternative, or are we just trying to mimic the current conventional products? And that's probably one of the arguments of people out there in terms of, is Islamic banking real, Islamic finance real, or is it just a fallacy?
Yeah. So I think in South Africa, we're still very much mirroring and mimicking the conventional space, and that is manifest to the development and the growth, the stagnation of the development and the growth. Because where the Malaysias, the Bahrains, the Middle East were in the 90s, in the early 2000s, was exactly where we were now.
Yeah.
And because the scholars weren't afraid with banking protocols, capital market protocols, insurance, The first move from a fiqh, takyif al-fiqh is the Arabic terminology we use, the adaptation of jurisprudence, meaning we will take the closest point of entry to enable this conditioning of banking, this conditioning of capital markets, the conditioning of insurance. So that is the entry point. So South Africa has been at that entry point for the past 30 years.
Yeah.
Other regions, they've developed. They've taken regulatory frameworks to the next level. They've taken standard setting bodies to the next level. We have access to all of those. We're not really innovating yet. And the reason for that is because we're not really developing it in Islamic finance in South Africa. Why? Because the custodians of Islamic finance in South Africa is comfortable with the market as it is.
Making money.
They're making money, but the masses do not understand the value that I was speaking about earlier. Because once we create this awareness and we educate the masses on the value add of Islamic finance, not only on your money side, but also on your life side as a man, as a human being. Once we understand the ecosystem of Islam, of Islamic finance principles, once our population and our community understands it, and all the stakeholders get involved, then we will have a different demand.
Yeah.
And that's the marketing strategy I was speaking about earlier. If we do the marketing budget and we use that money to create the awareness, to develop educational platforms for all the stakeholders, from the ultra-high net worth individuals till the recipients of zakah.
Yeah.
Because the objective of that recipient is to become someone that can pay zakah.
Correct.
But he doesn't know that. So he needs to be made aware and he needs to be educated and then given the zakah.
Correct.
But we first give the zakah and he stays on that balance sheet for perpetuity.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So the narrative of how and we can't point any fingers at the custodians. When I say the custodians, it's all of us sitting here as well in this podcast. We're part of that narrative. We're making a change as we're sitting here because we're conscious that something needs to happen to move, because currently we're standing still. So I think mimicking, mirroring is the access point. Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
Definitely not a position of where people say it's the same like the conventional. And we mustn't be afraid to accept that, because the Quraysh in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when the prohibition of riba came down in 4 stages, they told him, al-bay mithlu riba, that the trade and riba is exactly the same thing. Because, and my students, when they hear this podcast, I'm going to use the example again, 10 plus 2 is 12. So 10 plus 2 rand profit is 12 rand. 10 plus 2 rand interest is 12 rand. And for that reason, we're still saying today, it's the same thing. Then what's the difference? So the answer from Quran is, Allah permitted trade and prohibited interest. We as Muslims accept that, but what's the logic and what's the wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it? What is the fundamental difference? It's not the amount.
Correct.
It's not the methodology. It's not the mechanism. The ultimate difference is the relationship between the contracting parties.
Correct.
Because from that relationship, you have a buyer and a seller, you have a lender and a borrower. And there is different types of things that happens in a buying and selling contract and in a lending and borrowing contract. All the clauses will change because of that initial relationship. So the prohibition and the permissibility of interest and trade is really based on the relationship between the 2 parties. So whether you're doing banking, capital markets, or insurance, the fundamental base is not the numbers. And then why are we focused on the numbers to grow the market and not the qualitative narrative that needs to be underwritten? We call it in the finance industry. What is the underwriting? That's the actual actuarial science about it. The pricing methodology is based on the relationship. And if someone defaults, or if someone performs, or if he takes more risk, how much more is he going to earn? But the base is the qualitative relationship. Even in actuarial science, yes, you're going to come out with an algorithm and a number and a price. But they first talk about what is the relationship between the two parties? What type of risk are they taking? What type of effort are they making? What is the exposure? What's the appetite, etc., etc., etc. So, ourselves included, I think we misalign sometimes when we go into product development or advisory services. And it could be that conundrum where we find ourselves, do I do it that way? I'm going to make more money, or is this the right way to do it? So the right way is not always the financially rewarding way.
Correct.
And so we find ourselves in that situation all the time. In finance, you find yourself in this financial dilemma, opposed to a religious dilemma. But it's actually one thing. We separate it. It's like we separating here conventional finance and Islamic finance. It's all the same.
Yes, yeah, that's amazing, and so much, so profound, and so many points there that I just want to touch on. But the one that really stood out to me is the part now where you said the person receiving zakah at some point needs to be the one giving zakah. Right, and that is the such a profound message, because within Islamic finance it's that concept of the flow of money, where you are not supposed to the rich don't remain rich.
No.
And where you are, where money flows from someone who didn't have, but with them to then have the awareness and understanding that at some point they need to actually give back and not just continue to receive that zakah.
Yes.
And to actually do something with it and change themselves as the man in their life, and change the economy and the community and the people around them. But I was hoping that maybe, because you used the example of the 10 Rand plus 2 Rand, and in the one case it's profit, in the other case it's interest. Could you maybe, for the audience, just break it down into maybe a simple example where you use a specific product? Maybe if you could provide us maybe with an example. I know I'm just kind of tapping into you.
I don't know which institution I'm going to put in on the spot here.
Let's not use an institution.
This is the product.
Yeah, just product. Yeah, just an example.
Let's use a home loan. I think that is maybe practical for everyone.
Okay.
So a home loan, you go to the bank, you want to buy a house, right? You need money.
Yeah.
You don't have money. Then they go through this credit rating process. And just maybe to add on to the question, I get this question a lot. Sheikh, is the credit rating, the screening, is the sharia-compliant? I see that is at the top of the sharia-compliant criterion. That's why the credit rating is actually telling you that you can afford or you cannot afford based on your income and expenses. So they're actually protecting you. And from an Islamic point of view, albeit that debt is permissible, debt is not encouraged. We live in a capitalist system where debt is vastly encouraged. So if you are a borrower and you pay a little bit every month, we're going to give you more credit. So we're going to perpetuate the slavery that we're putting you in. I just wanted to add that point.
It's an important point, because you know what? I have to break you there. We get a lot of people, clients and customers, who say, but I'm Muslim, so I should qualify for Islamic home loan.
We're going into another sphere. Yeah.
So, but let's stay on course.
Because when you mention the zakat thing, and I think I have to mention this, when we talk about Islamic finance, people have the sense of it's a charitable organization. It's an NPO. It's a handout. And I'm speaking now, and maybe a little bit of trauma about it. When I was learning Hifz, also when I saw what the sheikhs would get in terms of the remuneration for the time that they spend with the students or in a school. And I personally, I was like, this is not on. And going now throughout, the experience in Islamic finance, coming back and looking at South Africa, when you use the word Islam in finance, in education, in anything, people has this default. It's a charity. But we must be very clear in all our facets and our faculties of Islamic education, business, finance, that Islamic philanthropy is one component of Islam, and perhaps a very big component. But for that component to work, you need to earn. And for you to earn, you need to make effort. And from that effort, you need to save. And a portion of that goes to philanthropy. But our entire mindset is on, Islam, Islamic finance, education, we have to get it. And entitled. Because we're Muslim. So coming back to the example of the home loan, so we need a house. I go to an Islamic bank, they decline my application on affordability. They tell you, you're earning 20,000 rand a month, you want to buy a house of 3 million rand. Sorry, we can't do it. What we can do for you is a house of 800,000 rand because your expenses show that you have X amount left. The client doesn't want that. Why? Because he goes to the conventional bank, and the conventional bank is going to make it work, in inverted commas, for him. Okay? And he's going to give him the 3 million rand home loan on that 20,000 rand salary, by the way. So just put your spouse's name there or add something, and they're going to engineer it. On the Islamic banking side, perhaps they will do the same, but to a certain extent. But we don't have the infrastructure in our Islamic banking trade desk or sales point of sales to do the same. Because most of the Islamic bankers come from the conventional side. So they will apply the same rule, but they're also a bit scared. They also feel a bit restricted because the Sharia board didn't sign off on that.
Correct.
So there's this nuance that, we don't really know what to do. And I'm mentioning this on air because those bankers phone me. Sheikh, we're sitting with a problem here. What do we do? I said, speak to the Sharia board, speak to, the people that's in charge. Because I can tell you what the thing is. It's not going to make a difference if you can't do it. So as and I'm not going to say as Muslims, as custodians of Islamic finance, because there's a lot of Muslims also, we need to be more proactive in not being shy to talk about the difficulty and the challenges that being in Islamic finance poses, because it does. But we're not communicating. So we're not being educated also about it. And so on the home loan side, we will have a murabaha, cost plus profit. It's a debt instrument. So now we're talking technical. What does that mean? The bank buys the house on behalf of the client, and the client has to take out or sign a purchase order that he promises to buy the house. This is technical. So the bank buys the house on behalf of the client, and then he adds a profit. And now we can ask, what's the reason he adds that profit for? So the reason he adds the profit is because there is a risk involved. The bank is not in development or in buying houses. They're in money. They're in the business of money. So the default setting is to make money on money. The conventional bank, he's not giving you a house. He's giving you the cash to go buy the house. And then he's charging you a premium on the cash for the house. So whatever happens to the house, there's no relationship to the bank. But the bank will hold that house as a security in the event that you do not pay for the house, meaning you do not pay the debt. And the bank holds that as a security. You lose your job, whatever happens, you can't pay anymore, the bank takes in the house, gone. On the Islamic banking and finance side, the bank actually buys the house, supposed to buy the house, let me say. So it's supposed to buy the house on a murabaha basis, based on the Islamic principles. They're supposed to take ownership of the house and then add a profit. And the profit they are only eligible for is because they took the ownership risk, and that risk will now be through the sale. Because what if the buyer backs out on his promise? Is it legally binding in South Africa for him to pay it? Is it legally binding in Sharia? Will he be punished for it? Is it a sin or is it a moral hazard? So that's the questions that has to be asked as well. In South Africa, a promise is not legally binding. An OTP you can get out of in a 7-day period. If the bank buys the house during that 7-day period and you pull out, he's sitting with the house there on his balance sheet and he has to sell it. So for that risk there, he's eligible for the profit. we're not going to go into the benchmark of the interest rate yet of the profit. That's going to be another podcast, inshallah, on its own.
We'll invite you back.
In terms of measuring. But the fundamental difference is ownership risk that is undertaken by the bank to be eligible for that profit. Because there is a period that he's going to, sit in a position where he's exposed to not being able to sell that house to the client that paid for it. And that is where he's eligible for profit. On the asset, not on the money that he gave. Because he didn't technically give the money. He bought the house. On the conventional side, the premium is being paid on the money that he borrowed from the bank. And so that is the difference. There is a full lengthy explanation that we can also go into. But I think the gist of it is in the fundamental lending and borrowing and buying and selling position in terms of ownership risk and lending and borrowing for a premium on money. And money is not a commodity, and for that reason it cannot be traded.
Sheikh, I have to ask you, as a scholar, in terms of Islamic finance in South Africa, do you still find there's a difference of opinion on Islamic finance amongst ulama in South Africa as opposed to internationally? Or how is it perceived or how is it accepted from our scholars in South Africa with regards to Islamic finance?
I think generally Islamic finance has been welcomed by the majority of the scholars in the country. There will be some differences of opinions on a madai basis, specific on technical issues. But generally, I don't think we have a problem from Cape Town to Joburg to Durban, the major cities in South Africa. There is a kind of consensus that we conform, Sharia boards, Sharia scholars in South Africa conform to the regulatory framework and standards set out by the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions based in Bahrain, which is a standard setting body. And the majority of Sharia scholars in South Africa subscribes to those standards and those principles as kind of a guideline and a framework, albeit not binding in terms of South Africa. We find it can become problematic to an extent because we can design a product and another scholar can have a difference of opinion on that product, which doesn't render the product Sharia non-compliant, but the opposite. And we always open as scholars to welcome, a difference of opinion, because this is a rahmah. We say this is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, difference of opinion, except and unless where there is clear prohibition that has been made permissible or permissibility that has been prohibited, where we will then come together as a collective, not as individuals, to deal with those type of methods, which I can't recall except maybe for one incident, which the details are not explicit, where a Sharia board actually removed themselves from an institution based on a technical dispute, I would say. But collectively, they just took a back step because of that dispute. And other than that, I can't recall over the last 30 years that we had in public disputes to the extent that there's a difference of opinion where it causes disunity. And I think that's an achievement for Islamic banking and finance, opposed to our other industries where we have a lot of disputes and arguments.
Absolutely, and one of the most attractive aspects of Islamic finance for me is when we look, for example, at conventional investments, let's say, and the concept of ESG, that environmental, social governance piece. From a governance perspective, and I think this is also your forte, Sheikh. So from a governance perspective, within the Sharia-compliant sphere, there's always been that aspect of governance, that body that overlooks the products, that overlooks how the advice is provided, how things are structured, how things are put together, and are they in line with those Sharia principles. If you were to compare, let's say, the governance of some of the conventional products when we talk about ESG specifically, and now the Sharia-compliant products, what are some of the key differences that you see, between that? Are there any?
In South African context.
From the South African context, yeah.
So in South African context, there's a lot of differences. Maybe to mention a few, in particular from a Sharia governance standpoint, we don't have a Sharia ombudsman. We don't have a consumer protection for Sharia consumers. We don't have a central Sharia supervisory board that is recognized by the South African government. We don't have, etc. I'll stop there. On the ESG side, it's the opposite. Because for every ESG product that our corporates have, it is governed, and it is governed by statute, law, and gazetted by the Constitution. That any product or any institution that goes out of that kind of framework will be dealt with by the law. On the Sharia side, we don't have that, except if the product is listed under ESG, under that. But standalone, on the Sharia governance side, there's no oversight, unfortunately, from a governance standpoint, which is a big gap. And with this gap and this deficiency, there is opportunity of awareness and education. It comes back to that origin that Islam came with. We need to read and educate ourselves. And the message of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is really a profound message that is for all mankind, and not just for us that was born Muslims. And the focus should be on that, developing again that sense of developing the man, ourselves. Because developing the man will develop the community, the society. The business side of it is a default. Our nature drives us to want to earn, to make money. But if our spiritual side, our mental state is not guided in the right way, then our actions in the business will be contrary to that which we purport as Muslims to say or to preach, at least.
Sheikh, and with that, we've run out of time, as always. And I'd like to extend another invitation for Sheikh to come back, inshallah, so we can dive a bit deeper into some of the...
Lots more to delve into.
I promise, Sheikh, we had quite a few questions for Sheikh. Okay. We haven't got into any of them. But Jazakallah, Sheikh, shukran so much for your time. I mean, it's really been excellent. There's been so much good points that's come from here. There's so much more that we can elaborate on. So we do hope to have Sheikh back, inshallah, for a second episode or edition, and perhaps turn it into a series. Who knows? But again, Sheikh, Jazakallah for your time. We appreciate it. And we wish you everything of the best in your career that you're currently doing. And continue doing the good work that you're doing in the community, inshallah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and definitely I'm open to join you guys again. Time flies very fast now.
Yes. Sheikh, just before we go, what we always like to do with our guests is to say, if you had a bit of advice in 1 minute, what advice would you give to the community?
The advice I'd give to the community, to yourselves, is the advice I give to myself. I think it's be truthful and honest to yourself before anything else. For us, we need to develop the self before we can develop others. And to enable the development of finance, community, we need to develop the self. So a lot of the time we neglect ourselves in being truthful to ourselves of what our purpose is, not just as Muslims, but as human beings. And our purpose is really to be a benefit to others. But before we can be a benefit to others, we need to enrich ourselves. And that is in making money, in being good spiritually, physically, and mindfully. So in all the facets of life, we need to enrich ourselves first before we can be a benefit to others. And we'll end on that note with the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says that the best of people are those who are beneficial to others. And we ask the Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us all to be a benefit to mankind by being beneficial to ourselves first, inshallah.
Jazakallah. Jazakallah, Sheikh. And there you have it. If you like this episode, please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.